Hello, dear learners. I welcome you all to another video session of the MOOC titled Rural Development in India. In this video session, we shall discuss the first video of Module 2. The Module 2 is titled as Introduction to Rural Development. And in Module 2, we have the first video, that is Unit 4, which is titled as Understanding Rural Development. So, dear learners, in this video session, we shall discuss about the meaning of rural development, the objectives of rural development, why is rural development needed, what are the challenges of rural development, so on and so forth. So this unit or this video will, enable you all to understand the fundamentals or the basic of the whole idea of rural development. So, dear learners, let us begin. Now, what do we understand by rural development? In simple words, dear learners, rural development means overall improvement of the quality of life of the rural people. Rural development is a vital aspect of national development, particularly in countries like India, where a significant proportion of the population resides in the villages. It refers to a process that aims at improving economic, social, cultural, and environmental conditions of the rural communities. Therefore, a rural development simply means improving the overall quality of life, improving the overall living conditions of people residing in the rural areas. Rural areas, we all know, are characterized by agriculture based livelihoods, close knit communities. They share a close kind of a relationship, and they depend upon natural resources for their survival, for their livelihood. However, these areas also face tremendous challenges in terms of poverty, unemployment, illiteracy, lack of infrastructure, limited access to healthcare and education, so on and so forth. So, there are multiple challenges that rural areas in India encounters or faces. And addressing these challenges through effective rural development is very, very essential for inclusive growth, social justice, and sustainable development. Therefore, dear learners, rural development is very, very crucial in order to address, in order to mitigate these problems, these issues. And in developing countries like India, rural development is not just a policy priority, but also very, very, or also an utmost necessity. Why? Because in countries like India, majority of the population, more than half of the population actually resides in the rural areas. And without the development of the villages, without the development of or well-being of the people in the rural areas, we cannot think about the overall development of our country or overall progress of our country. So if the villages in India do not develop, if the people in the villages are not empowered, if their well being is not ensured, then national progress would always remain, or national development would always remain incomplete. And therefore, it is very, very important for us to understand rural development, why rural development is needed, why, what is its importance, what is its need, what are its objectives, what are the challenges in implementing rural development policies and programs. It is very, very important, particularly if we talk about India. It is very, it is more important because even today more than half of our population resides in our villages. So, dear learners, we have discussed about meaning of rural development, and by now you must have understood that rural development can be defined as a continuous and comprehensive process which is aimed at improving the quality of life of people living in the rural areas. Rural development, it goes beyond economic growth. It is not just mere economic growth, or we cannot just understand, or we cannot just think that economic growth would automatically lead to development. No, rural development is something which is beyond mere economic growth. It includes social, cultural, institutional, and environmental dimensions as well. The concept of rural development emphasizes on empowering rural population by providing them with opportunities, resources, and capabilities to lead a productive and dignified life. Dear learners, earlier, rural development was mainly associated with agricultural growth. However, modern understanding recognizes that agriculture alone cannot address all the rural problems. Today, rural development includes diversification of livelihoods, development of rural industries, improvement in education, health services and infrastructure, social empowerment, environmental sustainability, so on and so forth. So rural development as such is a very, very broad concept. It is not synonymous to economic growth. It includes growth plus overall, development is in all these socio-cultural, political, economic, and other environmental and other such dimensions. So we can say that, rural development means enabling rural people to overcome poverty, reduce social inequality, and also actively participate in the development process. So, dear learners, we hope you must have understood what is rural development, what is the concept of rural development, and now let us try to understand the objectives of rural development. So the first objective of rural development is improving the standard of living of rural people, increasing their incomes, providing them opportunities for livelihood, so on and so forth. Then increasing agricultural productivity and income is another objective of rural development. Then generating employment, reducing poverty and inequality, providing basic infrastructure and services, and also providing social equity and gender equality, encouraging community participation, and finally also ensuring sustainable use of natural resources. So these are in brief the objectives of rural development. Now, why do we need rural development? We have already mentioned that rural areas faces several challenges. Let us now try to understand in details the major challenges confronting the rural areas in our country. Dear learners, we all know that rural areas play a crucial role in countries' social and economic development, especially in economies like India. Despite their importance, rural regions continue to face numerous challenges that hinder overall development and reduces the quality of life of rural population. These challenges are economic, social, infrastructural, environmental, and institutional in nature. The first challenge in rural areas is poverty and low income levels. Poverty is one of the most serious challenge in rural areas. Many rural households depend on agriculture, which often provides low and uncertain income due to small land holdings, low productivity, and dependence on the monsoons. Limited employment opportunities outside agriculture further worsen income insecurity in the rural areas. The second major challenge is unemployment and underemployment. Rural areas, even today, suffer from both unemployment and disguised unemployment. Agriculture is seasonal in nature, which leads to underemployment during the non harvest periods. Lack of non-farm employment opportunities, limited livelihood avenues in the rural areas compels many rural workers to migrate to nearby cities and towns in search of work, in search of livelihood opportunities. Another major challenge in rural areas is low agricultural productivity. Even today, our farmers continue to depend upon traditional farming methods, and then irrigation facilities are not adequate in many areas. Then there is poor access to modern technology, limited use of good quality seeds, or perhaps limited access even to good quality seeds and fertilizers, so on and so forth, result in lower agricultural productivity. Further, fragmentation of land holdings and lack of access to credit also restrict farmers from investing in improved agricultural practices. All of these results in lower agricultural productivity, and hence lower income from agriculture, which is therefore making agriculture largely unattractive. People today are reluctant to take up agriculture as their occupation, and what has happened is there is large scale migration from rural to urban areas in search of job, in search of livelihood avenues, so on and so forth. Dear learners, another major challenge in rural areas is inadequate infrastructure. It is a major obstacle to rural development. Many villages in the country lack all weather roads, reliable electricity, clean drinking water, proper sanitation, and digital connectivity. Inadequate infrastructure isolates rural communities from markets, schools, hospitals, government services, so on and so forth. So there is serious infrastructural lack in many rural areas of the country. Then, the fifth major challenge, if we say, in rural areas is limited access to education. Educational facilities in rural areas are often inadequate in terms of quality and accessibility. In many rural areas, we find shortage of trained teachers, poor school infrastructure, higher dropout rates, and lack of higher and technical educational opportunities, limited skill development opportunities, and employment prospects for rural youth, so on and so forth. So, even today, in many rural areas, we see that educational infrastructure is not developed, and people in the rural areas are often deprived of better infrastructural facilities in terms of education, and therefore those who can afford, they migrate to the cities, they send their children to the nearby town for educational opportunities, and those who cannot afford are again deprived, and there is high dropout rates among them, and they are struggling on a day to day basis to get better facilities. Another major challenge in rural areas is poor healthcare facilities. Rural areas frequently face a shortage of healthcare institutions, medical professionals, and essential medicines. Long distances to healthcare centers, lack of awareness, and poor nutrition contribute to high illness and maternal and child health problems in rural areas. Another major challenge in rural areas is social inequality and exclusion. Social challenges such as caste discrimination, gender inequality, and marginalization of certain communities remain prevalent in many rural regions even today. Women have limited access to education, healthcare, employment, and decision making, thereby restricting their overall development. Several communities are also socio-economically marginalized, like the lower caste and tribal communities. So these kind of inequalities, discriminations, and deprivations are still prevalent in rural societies even today, which hinders inclusive growth, inclusive development, and lack of equal opportunities to everyone. Then again, lack of access to credit and financial service is another challenge in the rural areas. Many rural households have limited access to formal banking and credit facilities. As a result, they often depend upon moneylenders who charge higher rates of interest in leading them to debt traps and financial vulnerabilities. So these kind of problems are also persistent even in the present day context. Then finally, we have environmental degradation as another rural challenge, which is, pressing, or which is now increasing in the modern day context. Overuse of land and water resources, deforestation, soil erosion, and improper farming practices have led to environmental degradation in rural areas. Climate change has further increased the frequency of droughts, flood, unpredictable weather, so on and so forth, and all of these have been together affecting rural livelihoods and food security, so on and so forth. Then what we see in rural areas is weak implementation of government programs. Although there are many governmental programs, many developmental initiatives on the part of the government, but then the impact is often limited due to poor implementation, lack of awareness, corruption, and inadequate monitoring. Various studies suggest that these developmental initiatives are not adequately or properly implemented, or if at all implemented, they are not properly monitored in the rural areas, and therefore these policies are left redundant. The effectiveness of these policies are not realized, and therefore it hinders the process of rural development. And lastly, dear learners, another major challenge which we have been witnessing in the modern times, though it was there since time immemorial, but it has been growing in the present day context, is the migration and the brain drain. Lack of opportunities and basic amenities in rural areas leads to migration of young and skilled individuals to urban centers. This results in labor shortages in villages and slows down the process of rural development. Thus, dear learners, we have seen that rural areas face a wide range of interconnected challenges that hinder their development and affect the well-being of rural populations. Addressing these challenges requires a comprehensive and integrated approach that focuses on improving infrastructure, education, health, providing employment opportunities, social equity, and environmental sustainability. And therefore, dear learners, it is in this context that, it is in the context of the large scale challenges that rural areas still continues to face even today, there is a need for rural development policies and programs. The need for rural development arises because of these persistent challenges faced by the rural communities. These challenges highlight the need for planned and sustainable development initiatives in the rural areas so that it can ensure overall well-being of the people residing in the rural areas, their empowerment, and overall development of the rural societies. Dear learners, you must have got the context in which highlights the need and importance of rural development. The context is the challenges that we have discussed, the problems that are still persistent in rural areas, and these problems indicates that rural development is very, very important. These problems highlight the urgent need for rural development policies and programs. These problems, these challenges, they highlight why we need holistic and sustainable rural development plans, programs, so that there can be socio-economic development in the rural areas, so that these challenges, the problems that are persisting, can be ameliorated, so on and so forth. So rural development is very, very important. So now let us try to understand how would rural development help, or what kind of changes would it bring. Firstly, rural development is important because it would bring balanced national development. Excessive focus on urban development often leads to regional imbalances. Rural development helps reduce disparities between urban and rural areas, thereby ensuring balanced and inclusive growth. When villages develop, migration to cities would decrease and thereby reducing urban infrastructures. So, we need rural development so that it can bring a kind of a balanced kind of development. It can decrease the regional imbalances that are persistent today, and it would also reduce pressure on urban infrastructure. Secondly, why rural development is important is because it plays a crucial role in poverty reduction. We have been discussing that a large proportion of the people living in the rural areas are poor, have, their socioeconomic condition is not very good. So, by generating employment, improving agricultural productivity, and supporting rural enterprises, rural development can play a key role in reducing poverty and improving livelihood or improving living standards. So, rural development is very important. Then, thirdly, rural development creates employment opportunities. For employment generation, also, therefore, rural development is very, very important because it creates employment opportunities not only in agriculture but also in allied activities such as animal husbandry, fisheries, handicrafts, agro processing, and rural services. Then, fourthly, for food security, rural development is very, very important. Why? Because rural areas are, we know, the backbone of food production. Improving rural infrastructure, irrigation technology, providing farmer support systems would ensure a stable food supply and food security not only for the rural regions but for the entire nation. And therefore, rural development also would ensure food security, and that is why also it is very, very important. Then finally, rural development is important from the point of view of social justice and inclusion. Rural development promotes social equality by empowering women, scheduled caste, tribes, and other marginalized groups. Few minutes ago, we have discussed that, in rural areas, even today, there is a lot of social inequalities and discriminations. Lower caste people, women, and other marginalized groups are deprived because of their lower social status, and it these kind of issues can only be ameliorated through proper rural development programs. And therefore, rural development is very, very important as it would ensure the access to basic services and participation in decision making process of these marginalized groups and communities. So all these makes rural development very, very important, and all this tells us why rural development is needed and what would happen, what kind of changes would it bring if rural development programs are properly implemented. Dear learners, by now you must have understood what is rural development, what are the objectives of rural development, what are the challenges that rural areas continue to face, and what kind of changes would rural development bring if it is effectively implemented, if such programs are designed and effectively implemented. Let us now discuss about a rural development in India, how it started. We'll briefly discuss that. As we have already mentioned, India is predominantly a rural country with a large share of its population living in the villages. Since independence, rural development has been a central focus of India's developmental strategy. In the early years after independence, India focused on land reforms, community development programs, and agricultural growth. Then came the Green Revolution, which played a major role in increasing food production, especially in wheat and rice. Then, with the plannings, with the 5-year plans, several rural development programs were introduced to reduce rural poverty and unemployment. All these programs and plans were aimed to provide wage employment, self-employment opportunities, and improving rural infrastructure, providing basic amenities to rural households, so on and so forth. Then we had programs which focused on providing guaranteed employment to the rural population, which helped to improve income security and, rural improve their socio-economic condition. Such initiatives were also aimed to reduce migration, were aimed to reduce the socio-economic disparities in the rural areas, where these programs were introduced to improve the socio-economic well-being of rural population, so on and so forth. Then we had also rural development programs, which catered to developing rural infrastructure and housing. Infrastructure in terms of rural roads, electrification, drinking water supply, sanitation, and also several housing programs which significantly improved rural living conditions over the period of time. Then in India, we have seen the implementation of decentralized governance, which was aimed at empowering the rural communities, or empowering, or allow giving people the access and platforms to participate in decision making process. So this was implemented with and we know that this was introduced with the implementation of the local self-government institutions, that is Panchayati Raj, which strengthened the grassroots democracy. Panchayati Raj institutions implemented in India enabled participation of the rural population or local population in planning and implementation of development programs. So dear learners, from if we see or if we go back to the history, we will see that post independence in our country, a lot of programs and policies were designed. First was to bring about agricultural growth, then came policies for reduction of poverty, then for providing employment opportunities, then improving rural infrastructure and housing, and finally also providing political empowerment to the local or to the rural population. In the recent years, if we see, there has been emphasis on digital connectivity, financial inclusion, skill development, cleanliness and renewable energy, and ensuring sustainable livelihoods. We have seen the increasing emphasis on technology in ensuring rural development. Technology is increasingly used to improve service delivery and transparency. So, these are the trends in the recent years, and we shall discuss about these policies and programs implemented in India for rural development in the subsequent modules. But then, dear learners, despite these policies, despite designing policies and implementing different programs, we see that regional disparities still persist even today, and there are rural areas which still face challenges like farmers' distress, agricultural distress, unemployment, lack of viable livelihood opportunities, socio-economic inequalities, lack of educational and health infrastructure, climate vulnerability, so on and so forth. And all these challenges still continue to affect the rural areas. Now, why? Why is it so? Why, despite number of efforts being taken up for rural development, number of policies and plans being formulated for rural development, why does these challenges or why these challenges still persist? So let us discuss about that. Firstly, dear learners, in rural areas, if you see, the rural population have very less land holding. The size of land holding is very, very limited, fragmented. So, it is very difficult for them with that size of land holding to earn better. Then we see that there is inadequate access to institutional credit. Rural people, they still, have to struggle a lot to get institutional credits because of lack of documents, lack of their awareness, so on and so forth. Then there is poor implementation of government programs. Studies have shown that due to various reasons like, bureaucratic hassles, then, corruption, lack of proper monitoring, lack of proper implementation, so on and so forth, there is lack of transparency, and therefore government programs, though these are designed with a goodwill but are not implemented properly at the grassroots levels. People are not benefited from these programs, or the benefits we have seen in many areas, or studies have shown that in many areas the benefits of the government programs and policies goes to the hands of a few, while many people are deprived, particularly people belonging to the marginalized sections of the society, are still deprived from the benefits of these rural development policies and programs. Then again, we see a very low level of awareness among the rural people. They are not aware about the policies and programs. They are not aware about various schemes, how to apply for those schemes. They, this lack of awareness, this, lack of, information also is another factor which hinders rural development, and which contributes to the persistent challenges in the rural areas even today. Then, dear learners, we know the kind of challenge that climate change has brought about in the entire globe. So this climate change has brought in tremendous challenges for the rural population as well, because they depend on the monsoons, largely depend on the monsoons for their agricultural production. And now we see that there is erratic rainfalls, there is uncertain climatic conditions, droughts here and there. So all these things have become very uncertain. Climate change has brought in precarity and uncertainty, which has increased challenges for the rural population. Then another challenge is a limited participation of local communities in the decision making process, or in the developmental process. So, dear learners, these are the reasons, these are some of the reasons why, despite various efforts on the part of government and non-governmental agencies, rural development has not reached the level that was expected, or, rural societies still face various socio-economic challenges even today. So, dear learners, you must have understood the challenges of rural development, and overcoming these challenges would require effective planning, governance, and community participation. Rural development is a comprehensive and continuous process that aims to transform the lives of rural people economically, socially, and environmentally. It is not limited to increasing income or agricultural output, but includes improving education, healthcare, infrastructure, social equity, and environmental sustainability. For countries like India, rural development is the foundation of national progress as well as the well-being of rural population. And this well-being of rural population is it directly influences economic stability and social harmony of the country as a whole. And therefore it is very, very important that these challenges that we have discussed must be addressed, so that real rural development can be ensured. And therefore, dear learners, although significant progress has been made in developing the rural areas, but these challenges still remain, and addressing these challenges requires coordinated efforts from the government, private sector, civil society, and rural communities themselves. Sustainable and inclusive rural development can bridge the gap between the urban and the rural areas, reduce poverty, and ensure a better quality life for the millions of people residing in the rural areas. And ultimately, the true development of a nation lies in the development of its villages. With this, we conclude here today. We hope you have understood what has been discussed in this video. Thank you.